tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
I wanted to turn to this event that's happening in Calgary today. It's the premiere of a new documentary called Generation Green. Now, if you can make it to the documentary, it is at the Plaza Theatre in Northwest Calgary tonight at 6 o'clock Mountain Time. But I think the documentary itself is one that people across the country should be paying attention to as well, because we hear all the time from the activists, the government, many people in the media, the importance of having green energy initiatives. We need to subsidize this, subsidize that, and all the like. But the one thing that people often forget to consider is that a lot of this is not at all based on the science. Just like with harm reduction, just like with COVID, what people present as scientific solutions oftentimes are anything but. So as we delve into this, I was glad to see this film come to the forefront here. It's called Generation Green. The filmmaker is Heidi McKillop, who joins us on the line now. Heidi, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, I just saw you a couple of days ago at my book launch in Calgary, so thanks again very much for coming out to that. So what's the story you're telling here?
So basically what we wanted to dive into was this question of what are the pros and cons of renewables? You know, I really was personally confused when I started to read articles online and everything was like 100% renewables, they're performing at this. And I'm like, well, if they're performing that high, then why are we still backing up everything with coal, hydro, natural gas, oil, you name it? Every country is pivoting because the energy demand is so high. So obviously there was a discrepancy there that we really wanted to dive into. So that was part of our investigation.
And what did you find? Not to give away too much, but what did you come away with?
So there's a couple key points that we really wanted to address in the film. The first component of the film is really speaking about, you know, solar panels on your roof. You have a direct connection to that energy source. It doesn't have to go into transmission lines that lose energy. So essentially, those forms of solar panels are actually not too bad for an average household. You can debate if you want to, you know, put the investment into it or not. But right now with our current federal government, they're heavily subsidized. So we kind of left that into the pro. The con really is, though, is that the renewable energy movement has basically gone off of numbers of their installed capacity instead of their actual output of what they're performing at. So we address this and we try to make it as simplistic as we can for our audience that doesn't really have an energy background or doesn't have an engineering background. Another component to this, which is extremely important to me as a new mom, as you know, a woman in this space, is really the exploitation of children in Africa for mining extractions that is used for the renewable energy movement, specifically cobalt. We were investigating in the Congo, and obviously there's a lot of problems that have been affiliated with cobalt extraction, primarily because they are completely owned in a majority from Chinese-owned companies. This is a huge conversation that we have to take into the supply chain, is that if you are going to demand an energy source and displace those emissions globally, is that fair? Is that really the way that we want to conduct ourselves as Canadians?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. I remember when I was covering the World Economic Forum's meeting in Davos. I can't remember if it was this year or it might have been last year. There was this one mining executive that's getting up there and saying, "Oh yeah, we need to do battery everything, battery powered everything. Fossil fuels are, a thing of the past." And then you look at his mining operation and realize that his company is doing all the mining that we need if we're converting to battery everything. So it's not this altruistic environmental message, and people often forget that there's a cost to everything. And it's not the case that you can get rid of this one energy source and have another one. We haven't yet harnessed wind in a meaningful way, which is the only form of energy that I guess doesn't really have a consequence apart from the construction of the windmills. But you're right, all of these other ones do, and they're either ineffective or partially effective or incredibly intensive to produce, as in the case of mining.
Yes, exactly. And even with the wind turbines, what is really interesting, we've gone off, dove into this very intensively in the documentary as well, because we had the opportunity to go down to Southern Alberta and talk to landowners about the placement of the wind turbines. Specifically, this one project that recently got canceled But it was due in part because of the mobilization of community members in Southern Alberta. And they were really trying to say, like, this is a pristine area of Alberta, right by the adjacent to the Waterton Park. They don't want to see that land industrialized by any kind of energy company. And they certainly have a right to start asking these types of conversations. This is a really complex issue. We can't just pick and choose which conversation we want to say is the truth or not. It really needs to be foundationally built around a larger conversation. And I'm not personally against wind or solar. I think any kind of technology that we want to diversify in within means is a great idea, but you're going to have the same regulations that the oil and gas faces, which is proper decommissioning of the wind turbines, proper disposal sites for solar panels, which we do not have in place right now. And under my understanding is that really does need to be improved long term.
Yeah, and you're right to point out, and I'm glad you shared your own perspective on this, because I think there's a knee-jerk reactionary component that even some supporters of the oil and gas sector have. Whereas if they hear green energy, they assume it's bad because it's coming from people that typically hate oil and gas. And I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. But ideally, we should be approaching any energy discussion with the same conversation, which is this efficient? Is this affordable? What does it do for our stated goals, our needs for energy production, our stated environmental goals, all of that? And you should be able to have that discussion in a fairly dispassionate way that is focused on the facts. But all of a sudden, you have people that are just against oil and gas, and they don't actually care about hearing things that the oil and gas industry is doing in Canada and the United States to some extent to deal with the problems that they raise. And this is where we end up where there is a need for this grown-up conversation about it.
When we started to put out documentaries like this, I get quite a bit of backlash on my personal life. And people will start saying, you have a sociology background, a social work background, or who are you? You were a receptionist at one point and a waitress. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. I'm really proud of the transition of being able to be in multi different faceted industries. And that collectively, hopefully, will be projected in my films, basically of having a balanced conversation from a human perspective. We really focused a lot on the citizens. We focused on the people in the regions of what their voices and concerns were. And that's what I care about, is that we have to have that open dialogue from the ground up, not from the top down. And I think that's something that I'm really proud about with this film that we accomplished, is really getting the citizens to be at the forefront of the discussion.
So I mean, you've been in this space for quite a while, and I know you've had an open mind about this. Did anything surprise you? Did you learn much when you were making this?
A lot. Yeah, I think there's a couple things that really shocked me. Was definitely the numbers. I feel very disheartened by the fact that certain groups are putting out random numbers that are so contradictory to what their actual performance is at in terms of industrial wind and solar plants. That really confuses me. And, if I'm confused working in this energy space for quite a few years, I can guarantee you my mom, my grandmother, my sister, they're all going to be confused as well. So I think that's really something that I was shocked by and didn't appreciate.
Who's your target on this? Because the challenge when you have these sorts of discussions a lot of the time is that the people that are going to come out and see it are the ones that are already on your side, or already open to it. There's a tremendous hostility in certain subsets. I mean, even in Alberta, it's probably the most feisty, the opposition in Alberta. But so how do you break through that? How do you get it to the people that genuinely need to see this message?
That's a great question, Andrew. And I think that with each film that we start to do, it slowly progresses into getting more viewership. And hopefully over time, people will start taking me more seriously as a director and producer of film. And I do get a lot of backlash because I don't have primarily a film background. I fell into it when I was at my waitressing job and just started to hear people talk about their problems and about the narratives around oil and gas. And I thought, gosh, like what a great documentary this would make. And that was my first one, A Stranded Nation. So since then, over the last 5 years, it's really progressed. And I try to challenge myself in my own beliefs every time we tackle a subject. I sit down, I play both pros and cons. I weigh them very heavily in my head. And I do a ton of research. So I hope over time, people will start slowly getting into the idea that even if you disagree with a topic, or even me as a person, that you will take the time to actually watch something that maybe will challenge your point of view.
All right. Well, where can people get details about the event tonight?
So it's on Eventbrite, and the film begins around 6 o'clock and doors open at 5. It's at the Calgary Plaza in Kensington. And we hope to see you folks there. And then tomorrow we'll be launching it digitally online on my YouTube channel.
All right. The film is called Generation Green. Definitely give it a look. Heidi McKillop, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.